Welcome to Link by Golf. I'm your host, Ross McGuire. In this episode, I'm joined by Mark Immelman, a professional golfer, incredible coach, analyst and broadcasting star of the On the Mark podcast and PGA Tour Live. From coaching players at every level to connecting with millions of golfers worldwide via his podcast and broadcasting work, Mark's love for golf is incredible. We'll hear about Mark's journey, his insights into broadcasting, and also look out for the fun part, where he discusses being mistaken for his brother Trevor. Let's hear from Mark. On this week's episode, I'm really delighted to be joined by Mark Immelman. Mark, thanks for joining. Fantastic to see you.
It's great to see you, Russ. I'm envious of your accent, and I'm thrilled to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're the first person to tell me that, so that's a great start. So, Mark, where we're starting today is, I wouldn't say it's at the end, but coming up in a few weeks is the Masters, and you've got Magnolia Lane, two brothers there as broadcasters, and one is a former Masters champion. What does that mean for you as a family when you get there?
To be honest with you, Russ, it's sort of somewhat surreal to think that two young men, well, we're not so young anymore, but, two guys from a little town close to Cape Town in South Africa, one, get to go there, two, get to be a part of bringing the Masters to the world via television and via masters.com and all these sorts of things. And then to have Trevor have won that event in 2008, whenever I get to go there, I feel like I jumped the fence a little bit. Some ways it's so incredible and so mysterious. You feel like you're not worthy. My hero has always been Bob Jones. And so to get to go there is a thrill in itself, and to get to go on the grounds and then, have the opportunity, because I'm on the Amen Corner channel, to have the opportunity to document what is arguably the most famous stretch of three holes in the world.
Absolutely.
It's an honor that I couldn't fathom. It's a thrill I couldn't describe. And I pinch myself. You get there and you're like a child. You're like a kid in a candy store. And then you realize the gravitas of it all, and then you're instantly nervous. And then the show comes on and you hear the Masters theme song and the anthem, and then it gets the adrenaline pumping. So it's the complete sensory experience. And to experience it with my younger brothers is incredible. It's unbelievable. And I'm eternally thankful. Long may it continue.
Fantastic. And then you touched about your childhood there in South Africa, Mark, near Cape Town. So how did you first get into golf? What was it that took you into the game?
It was accidental, really. I mean, look, us South Africans, we're very much an outdoorsy nation, and I played all sports. I was a good cricketer and I was a good tennis player, and we had to play two sports, one in winter, one in summer. So in winter time, I played rugby, and I'm not the biggest guy in the world, so I got badly injured and broke a wrist in a rugby match. And that evening, when I went into surgery to have it repaired, I remember lying there on the gurney, sort of, medicated. I was only 13 or whatever I was, and my coach came in and said to my parents, he's like, "Mark's too small to play rugby. So I'm going to recommend, because he plays so hard, maybe you find something else for him to do." So fast forward, I recover and I get the plaster cast back in the day off my arm. And my friends it was one weekend, and my friends were just going down to the local golf course. And they said, "Well, let's go to the golf course." And I said to my dad, "Hey, I'm going to play golf." And he was like, "Cool. There's an old set of your granddad's clubs in the garage."
Oh,
He was
fantastic.
right-handed. My granddad was right-handed. I was left-handed at the time. And so picked up said clubs, went to the golf course, and the proverbial bug bit. So there we are. I mean, it was a rugby injury that got me into golf, so serendipitous, and it's been an incredible journey from that fateful first outing at Somerset West Country Club.
Yeah, and it was a terrible injury for you, but a lack of ability for me that kept me out of rugby and then kept me in golf. So fantastic. And you mentioned earlier as well, Mark, some of your influences in regards to like Bob Jones. What
Mhm.
other influences did you have in your game in those early days?
I would say my then father-in-law, who is very Scottish, and his brother-in-law was, a long-time professional over in St Andrews. So there was a lot of golf that way, and I played a lot of golf with them. And I was young because I got good quickly. So there were local club members that had an influence on me.
Okay.
The then club professional was a gentleman named Robbie Chapman, who, as a young kid, we didn't have very much, and so I worked part-time in his pro shop. And so he taught me about golf and taught me about club fitting and repairing grips and stuff like that. And I just fell in love and I became a voracious reader and everything I could like get my hands on. The old Golf Digest magazines. I remember, getting them and poring over them and cutting out the swing sequences back in the day. I still have the file of those in laminated form. And
Wow.
then it was in the era of VHS and beta video cassettes, and my dad would get these. I remember one by John Jacobs that I watched daily. How to swing a golf club, I think it was, and so just it was Dr. John Jacobs, who thankfully I got to meet later in life, so very fortunate. Bob Jones was a hero. Gary Player was naturally a hero, being South African. Watching the little golf we saw on TV, obviously I looked up to Sevi Ballesteros, and so it was just lots of reading, lots of video, and I still have that passion, to be honest with you. I love to watch golf footage, and I have golf books. I've got a library worth now because I can afford them, which is good. So still the same thing, but I'd say the major influence was my dad, my father-in-law, and our local club professional.
Fantastic. And growing up in South Africa, I mean, what an incredible amount of talent has come out of your country in terms of golf. But what was your amateur career like in terms of, where you played, what types of competitions, what types of players are you playing against as well?
I was decent. I got good as a kid, and then I made our provincial team as a junior, and then at that stage we had club competitions, which were like an inter-club league, and I played as like a 14-year-old, 15-year-old on the men's team versus the other teams, and so I got picked for provincial sides and played in those sorts of tournaments. I never, I sort of rue it, but I never ever made the South African team. My brother
Oh,
did.
really?
Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay.
but still I was, quite successful, and then we had mandatory military service back in those days. So I got done with high school and went to the army and played on the Defense Force team. They were part of the league,
Right.
and that sort of one thing led to another from there. And after that, I was good enough, I thought, to play golf, but I didn't think I was ready, golf
Right.
as a career. And
Uh-huh.
so I caddied for a little while, and the caddying, honestly, I caddied for a few American guys who worked on the then Sunshine Tour, and that opened up the doors to come over to college and play college golf here in the States.
Brilliant. And I was just going to get into that as well. So what was the college experience like for you? You're obviously coming from South Africa and then you're right across the world. And did that impact you playing for South Africa as a country as well, given you're so far away at that time?
It was difficult, but I was a little older. Typically, yeah, in the States, the kids go to college at age like 18, 19-ish after high school. But I'd been out of high school a couple of years in the army, so I was 21 when I arrived, so maybe I was a touch more experienced. But
Uh-huh.
it didn't make it easy because of the culture change and you're a long way from home. But the team I joined, we had an incredible coach who was not necessarily a coach, he was just more an administrator, but a real a real educator, and he taught us more about life than golf. And so I thrived in the environment with the people, and so much so that, many, many moons later, after I was teaching golf on the European Tour, he called me up and they told me the golf coaching job was available at the university where I graduated. And my fiance and I came over here and took the job. So it was Columbus State University, then Columbus College, had that big an influence on me that I was prepared to leave, pretty good career in Europe and come over here to the States to start again as a college coach for a while.
Yeah, and digging into your career in Europe, what did that involve in regards to coaching players and working with elite golfers as well?
Yeah, it was, well, at that stage, I'm 9 years older than my younger brother, Trevor. And So I was naturally then, because I always had a bent towards swing technique. I guess it was all
Okay.
breeding.
Uh-huh.
And so I sort of naturally became older brother and coach. And he was good. And so at a time, there were a lot of good young golfers over in Europe coming over, and guys like Jeff Ogilvy and Adam Scott, and so it was a fun time to be out there. And yeah, I taught some good South African players. And it's sort of helped me gain experience, make my mark as a teacher a little bit, and that led to the coaching career, which eventually, led to my career in broadcasting now.
Yeah. And just on the part with the European Tour, it's always talked about that, and I guess you'll never be able to put a value on it or a true understanding, but that the European Tour people are pretty close. But what was that experience like going around Europe as a place? Did you find it interesting? Did you get the chance to really explore outside of just, I say just coaching your brother and other players in the region?
It if I had something to do over, Russ, I would do that time of my life better. Because we would. You 1 week you're in Munich in Germany, and the next week you're in the Alps in Switzerland, and then you're in Italy, and to go on that European tour was a thrill, but sadly I didn't take advantage of the experience because you're young and impressionable, and it's all about golf, right? So it's
Yeah.
to the next town, and it's the hotel and the golf course, and the hotel and a restaurant and the golf course. Where if I knew then what I know now, I would have used that time more productively to really experience and see some of the cool places that I got to go. But it was, I mean, to me, I've still got a very soft spot for the DP World Tour. It was a proving ground. It was a growing place for me, and the places they get to go are incredible.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to go to Cran-sur-Sierre and go up the
That's
mountain there
beautiful.
and
Yeah.
actually play it. And it was just mind blowing. What a day I had in the middle of summer, about 30 Celsius. It was fantastic. An amazing place to play golf.
Yeah, it is. I remember going to that event, and we stayed in this quaint little hotel, and I would sort of walk up and down the road, but that was the extent of it. A lot of the golfers went up to the glacier, which was, a few thousand feet up from where the golf course was. And I didn't, because I was just so busy on the driving range, which again, I rue that mistake. So I'll leave it right there.
Maybe we'll get you back there one day, Mark. We can
That'd
figure
be
that
nice.
one out.
That'd be
And
nice.
then you mentioned your college coaching career, so you then get the invite back to the States. What was that like? Because you were there quite a long time at Columbus State.
Yeah, longer than 20 seasons. It was an incredible time for me. We got successful. I got to the program where I played, and it had sort of fallen on hard times a little bit, and thankfully, because of that, I got to put my own fingerprints on the show and what was happening. And we brought in some really good players. Thankfully, these were young men that I'd coached in the past, so they were prepared to
Ah, okay.
come over and play, and they were all good, and they became all Americans and such. And so we had a lot of success. We won a lot of tournaments, and we finished everywhere in the top four except for winning. So we had success beyond the national championship victory.
Uh-huh.
Um, so very cool. And like, I think I was there for like 21 seasons,
My
and
goodness.
and during that time, the university were benevolent enough to allow me to still give lessons on the side. So I really grew as an instructor then too. And that time for me, honestly, as I look back, was a real formative time for me to learn how to communicate well. And it sort of set me up for the next chapter, which was broadcasting and getting into radio and then television. Because, when you're out there in the middle of the summer teaching everyone from a ranked beginner to a PGA Tour professional, you learn quickly how to look at a concept and describe it in many different ways. And that's essentially what television announcing is.
Yeah.
So it was a blessed time for me. It was a fun time for me. At the end of it, though, the season was definitely done. Um, uh, because college coaching is a grueling 24/7 job, because
Yeah.
it's not just putting out good teams, it's nurturing and helping young men grow and mature. And so it's full time, and every season as a coach, I was getting a year older, maybe a year more grumpy, and they were a year younger. So it was so everything was changing. So at the end of it all, I think the timing was perfect. but like I say, the time spent, learning to improve communication and just learning about myself set me up for TV later on.
I was going to say, were you starting to get to the Bob Torrance stage of being pretty direct?
Not that grumpy. I've always been direct. No, Mr. Bob, I got a lesson from him one time, and I
Oh,
remember,
really?
yeah,
Wow.
that Scottish brogue was infectious, and you're right, he was just straight down the line. There were no ifs, ands, or buts about things, and it was either you do it or you don't. So maybe I've got some of him inside of me, which would be a good thing, because he's a legend, or he was a legend. His son Sam is the same way, and so I'm again thankful for everything I've gotten to experience.
Absolutely. And then, Mark, you mentioned it took you into broadcasting. I mean, you're a star of your own podcast, which is incredibly successful. You've got a ton of episodes, over 300, I believe. You're working for CBS as an announcer and analyst. And tell me about that journey. How did you get into that part of the golfing industry?
It was serendipity. I mean, when I was teaching in Europe, when the tour went to South Africa, just because I knew a few folks, I would make the odd guest appearance on the television broadcast. And so I had a foray with it then. And then to me, it was sort of always a natural extension of what I was doing.
Uh-huh.
And so one stage, honestly, there's a gentleman over here in the States. His name is Matt Adams, and he has a very successful, or used to have a very successful radio show, which has subsequently turned into TV,
Okay.
called Fairways of Life. And I
Right.
remember being in a rental car one day, and the satellite radio was on, and I was listening to him, and it was Teaching Tuesday, and he had one other teacher on, and I remember then uh, Twitter had just started happening. And so he said, for questions or whatever, tweet us at, which I did. And I basically said, hey, if you're ever looking for another teacher, I'd love to join your show. And
No way.
the
Wow.
producer reached out right away and said, sure, how about 2 weeks' time kind of thing. And so I remember the day. It was a Tuesday morning, naturally, and it was February. It was freezing here, and I wasn't giving golf lessons. And it was a morning show, so I came on, and Matt came on, and for the first, it was going to be a 12-minute segment. And obviously, the first few questions were like, well, you Trevor's older brother and all this sort of stuff. And so I was answering those things. And then they asked about, well, what about Gary Player in your life? And so it was the stuff you'd sort of expect. And then at the end, he's like, okay, Mark, and there's like 2 minutes left in the segment. He goes, all right, it's cold everywhere in the States. We're up here in the Northeast. What advice could you give the golfers to, if they're housebound, how can they work on their golf swing? So I was like, it's very simple. You just, without a golf club, just take a throw cushion or something and just kind of rest your head against the wall, get in your golf posture with your hands close to the wall. So you're just holding the pillow lightly in place. And then I'm like, make a backswing and make a downswing to impact. And that'll teach you how to stabilize your pivots. And it will teach you too to get your hand path appropriate, because if you're over the top or too far inside out, you'll hit the wall with your hands. And he says, my producer Dom is doing that right now in the recording booth. So I was like, cool. Dom pops on live and he goes, hey, Maddie, the boards are lighting up with people calling in. So we go to break and Matt says, look, there's a lot of calls. Would you stay for another segment?
Wow.
I had nothing but time. I was like, sure. So it turns out we do two more segments, me taking calls, or us taking calls from call-ins. And at the end of it all, we get done and we wrap. And Dom says to me, he goes, that was good. You should think of doing radio. And said, honestly, how do I do that? And he goes, leave it with me. I'm going to put you in touch with a guy from PGA Tour Radio, which they
My
did. And
goodness.
they did a sound check. And then I didn't hear from them. And then all of a sudden, it was because I got the typical, well, thanks for reaching out. We've got your name on file, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I go away and I sort of forget about it. And we were over in South Africa on vacation. It was summer vacation here in the States. And I'm in South Africa and there's limited internet because we still dial up down there, I think it was. And something made me check my email the day before we were about to fly home to the States. And it was an email from the guy, the head of the radio crew, saying, are you available next week to work the Greenbrier? And I emailed right back. I'm like, heck yes. So I got there sight unseen, never been to Greenbrier, never done radio, and they shepherded me through the whole thing, and that grew into PGA Tour Live, which all of a sudden one Friday morning, Tiger was in the midst of one of his comebacks, and PGA Tour Live was the only only broadcast company that had him on Friday morning. It was
No
before
way.
afternoon
Wow.
airtime, and I was on the call, and I must have done a nice job because CBS came calling, and so here we are. So I'm a very fortunate, very blessed guy who's happened to fall into some pretty cool spots in his life.
I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Lomond Golf Tours for their support. Let's hear from them now.
At Lomond Golf Tours Scotland, we understand that choosing the perfect golf trip can bring its challenges. With more than 500 golf courses in Scotland and another 2,000 around the UK and Ireland, many of our guests don't know where to start. But for Lomond Golf Tours, it's not just about the golf, it's about providing an experience that will exceed expectations, that will turn dreams into realities, and that will create memories that last a lifetime. Lomond Golf Tours have helped thousands of guests build bespoke golf trips to create a magical experience. Travel in style, whether executive chauffeur travel, whether it's golf on a major championship venue or one of our hidden gems, 5-star accommodation or a boutique bed and breakfast, or is it whisky tasting on a private boat? Lomond Golf Tours are here to help build the tour of a lifetime. Whether you're celebrating a special occasion or ticking it off your bucket list, embark on a trip that you'll remember forever. To learn more about our offerings for 2025 and beyond, visit www.lomondgolftours.com.
Now let's get back to the pod. But then it's interesting, Mark, I think, and one of the reasons I put the podcast together is what are people's journeys in life and how do they come across people? I think the part that's really interesting is that you've invested in yourself over all these years, you've got all this experience, and then it maybe feels really natural to you, but you've got a talent that's clearly standing out to people when you get in front of them.
Well, thank you. I will say this, and you talk about my podcast, because PGA Tour Radio came to me eventually after doing some live play-by-play. And at that stage, they were doing streaming radio stations on Monday through Wednesday. And they said,
Okay.
would you like to do a show? And I was like, yeah, by all means. I mean, I was looking to grow in the industry.
Yeah.
And it wasn't broadcast, it was streamed. So you went to pgatour.com and you can listen. And it was across midday. And they said it did fine, but the numbers weren't great. And at the end of the year, they reach out to me and say, listen, we're going on demand with this show of yours. You're going to do a podcast. And I was like, what's a podcast? And they're like, look, essentially you're just doing your show so it's on demand so people can listen whenever.
Yeah, of course.
And so I did that. And then all of a sudden, after about 3 months of not getting very good traction, I was like, I'm a golf teacher. And I just, without their permission, I guess, I just, had a little fork in the road where instead of talking about PGA Tour results and players and stuff, I was like, let's just get into instruction. And all of a sudden, because people want to play better golf.
Of
And the
course.
listenership grew and grew and grew and grew. And then next thing it's in the millions. And the next thing we're 9 seasons later. But I was fortunate. And I say that because my podcast, the goal's always been to introduce the golfer to the instructor he or she may never meet. And to introduce the instructor to the golfer they may never meet. And then for these bright minds around the world that might never get the cover of a magazine. Like I was a great teacher, but I was never on the cover. And so I wanted to be the person that would help them get noticed. And so my podcast has been built around that premise to introduce people around the world to Butch Harmon.
Yeah.
And to then make it available to them, just like me as a kid who learned all these things from reading magazines. I want to be the purveyor of that stuff, and it's worked out well, thankfully. But it's sort of beneficial to all, and that's why you say I'm experienced and I do a good job. Yeah, maybe, but there are lots of people around the world that are that, but they just don't get the opportunity. So that's where my podcast is to give young teachers a voice and bright minds and stuff. And so I'm very thankful, and that's why I do what I do in the podcast.
Yeah, and it's something I really enjoy listening to is all these different diverse perspectives. And to talk about another podcast as well, there's Carol Morris. He's got his own Mind
Yeah,
Factor
he's
podcast, and
excellent.
it's fantastic. He brings in people that you might never think you'd ever hear from. And then they've got all these amazing, not necessarily opinions, but perspectives, I guess, and facts to
Mm.
back up information they've got. So I really love listening to that diverse set of knowledge about golf versus just hearing the same narrative all the time that, well, everybody smashes it 400 yards and you need to
Yeah.
do X, Y, Z, or you've got to make this move or you're not a great golfer. It's just, you can get really caught up in just a trend versus what is actually out there across many, many people.
Carl's had such an impact on me that he earned a chapter in my book because after many seasons, I reached out to a publisher to say, we've got this treasure trove of information. I want to put it together in a book. I mean, there's so much of it, we had to figure out who was going to be in there. And there's probably a second edition coming. But Carl, just the insights he's had on a couple of shows he's joined us on, I felt was worthy of just more spotlights. And the way he paints it, the way he describes it, the way his insight and his intellect are off the charts. And I was glad when he reached out to me and he goes, "Well, I've started a podcast too." And then he sort of returned the favor and I joined his show. So it's been cool to kind of help him get to the United States audience a little bit,
Yeah.
and then vice versa because he's been a real treasure in my life.
And then from a coaching perspective, Mark, without going too deep on it, I mean, what do you see are maybe some of the, there's no right or wrong, I think is the way to say it, but is there ways that people could be more effective in their coaching with their pupils to get effectively better results and ultimately more enjoyment from the players without going too deep all the time?
Yes. It's funny, I was just having this conversation before you. I was interviewing a guest, and it's a point that I'm trying to make all the time where in the era of information, I feel like the human being has been removed from the whole equation. And what instructors and coaches and teachers and all these folks need to realize is that we are human beings who play golf. We're not golfers who are statistics. Like you can't tell me that because he's leading the PGA Tour in strokes gained off the tee, he's going to drive it great this week. That's not the truth.
Absolutely.
And so almost all this data and stuff is super helpful, and it's changed the industry, but it's always also intellectually lazy in my opinion, just to go to data and information right away. And that's
Yeah.
where because I'm doing what I'm doing with that show, I'm beginning to see like there was this data influx and information overload, and everyone was just like information, 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 and new ways to describe it. And sadly, the new ways were getting more and more scientific. I think of Tom Morris must be rolling over in his grave. And now you're starting to get more teachers kind of like me, kind of like Carl, and people who are even Sean Foley, who was like way technical to start. They're suddenly realizing that, hold on a second, we've got to pivot a little bit because there's still a human being that we're dealing with, that we're molding here. And this human has emotions and feelings and aspirations and dreams and fears and all this sort of stuff that are brought to bear when they're on the golf course. And
Yeah.
just thinking that they can do everything perfectly all the time is a fool's errand. So thankfully, I'm seeing a bit of a trend back to kind of the holistic approach, which I think is tantamount to success.
Yeah, and I had someone on my podcast last year, a guy called Jamie Edwards, who's worked with a number of different football professionals, golf professionals, tennis professionals. And Jamie, it's really interesting. It was an interview, but I was obviously learning lessons again from him.
Yeah.
And one of the things was he was talking about practice. What does practice in inverted commas mean? And I remember being in a session with him years ago where he talked about practice being everything that's in competition, but you're not in competition. But if you treat it as competition, then you're effectively training yourself to be under that pressure.
Yeah.
And I'd been a range rat for years, working on all kinds of things. I'm away hitting 200 balls and then getting frustrated when I can't deal with being over par or maybe I'm under par for once. And then I committed to just one ball, whether I'm playing 9 holes or 18. If I'm going out that day for a round that is testing my ability to score, then I only play one ball. and it's been phenomenal. Like I'm not, it's not like I'm suddenly going to be on the seniors tour or something like that. But from a personal perspective, I can judge and understand how I'm performing differently to how I was before. And I'm
Yeah.
starting to, like, I'm actually getting over a 3 foot putt and going, oh, wait a second, this is for par. I've made
Yeah.
a nice start here, or I've made a bad start. I'm trying to get something back. And it's all those crazy things that go in your mind when you're playing a general round of golf, when you're in competition. It happens in practice as well. Practice inverted commas.
Oh, no doubt. Recently here I had a conversation with an English guy called Will Stubbs, and they're from Zen putting mats, Zen stages. And these mats, putting, hitting areas are variable, so you could move the tilts and the lies and such.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the whole premise behind it was basically when you play golf, the only time you get a level lie is on the tee. The rest of the time, there's humps and hollows and ups and downs. And
Yep.
and if you want to really make sure that your game improves, you should practice in that environment, to your point.
Of course.
Because most golfers listening to this will resonate with the fact to say, well, why am I not getting my practice game to the golf course more often? Because in the practice game, you're practicing in the sterile kind of an environment where it's flat lie, good lie most times, and it's not dealing with
Same wind direction. The wind's
exactly,
coming the
yeah,
same way, and it's like, oh, I'm
uh,
really good in a right to left wind today. Yeah,
exactly.
sure. We've just hit 100 balls that way as well.
Yeah, so I feel and I agree with where you're going there because practice needs to be. Look, you might need to make a technical adjustment, but then once you've made that, you need to understand how that adjustment to your swing performs off different lies and in different situations. Because golf will put you in 72 different situations if you hit 72 shots. I mean, think about the last time you basically hit the same shot in the same condition. It happens rarely. So practicing that way is a great way to learn to improve.
Absolutely. And then, Mark, you talked there about your books. So you're an author of a few books, but Lessons from the Best. I'd love you to talk about that and just give listeners an insight into what they can gain from it.
I'm very proud of it. The beauty about the book is it's not all about me. There's 18 chapters in there, and the last one is about me, essentially summarizing. But every chapter is self-contained, and it is from a guest that's been on my show. Like so, we've got lessons from Butch Harmon to David Ledbetter to Carl Morris to some sports psychologists like Bob Rotella and Bob Winters, and then players like Jordan Spieth and Victor Hovland and Nick Price, Hal Sutton. So it's like we've got old and new, we've got young and old, we've got experienced and sort of newish rookies, and all of them are just. Some of them were picked. We had a poll to our viewers to say, okay, which podcast did you like the best? So we took a few of those, and then I picked a few, and the editor picked a few too, just to make sure the book is to help you improve your game from like the inside your head to the soles of your feet and the tips of your fingers. And it's
Yeah.
course management, it's golf swing stuff, it's mental stuff, it's emotional stuff. And then there's some really cool anecdotes from guys like Nick Price, talking about playing in links golf and how he had to learn to do that. And Hal Sutton about learning lessons from, Raymond Floyd and Byron Nelson and Ben Hogan in this company. So I would like to think it's your one-stop shop for golf instruction. Every book, every chapter is a selection of quotes that were made by the guest. And then I just elaborate on those. So I listened back. We got transcripts of all the podcasts we picked. And I went through them and I tried to weave sort of a story from each one. Initially, it
Yeah.
was supposed to be like, okay, this chapter's on driving and this chapter's on putting.
Uh-huh.
But when I was listening back to the shows, like to hear Jordan Spieth talk about how he learned to chip and why he uses 0 degrees of bounce on his wedge, I was like, gosh, I mean, that's incredible. Then the next thing he's talking about playing under pressure at Birkdale en route to the Open. And
Yep.
Jordan was the reason why the book became basically each a contained chapter where it's just guys talking about golf and game improvement and playing the game. And it's an easy read, I've been told. I'm proud of it. It's done very well, and it's people can get it on Amazon. It's easy.
But it's interesting, Mark, you touched on it at the start when you were a junior golfer and growing up. Where did your lessons come from? It's with playing with people and listening to their stories, watching them, reading books. It takes you back into that where you're learning from other people's experience. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I always wanted to, write a book. We'd put together a few ebooks before, but the book for me, and you highlight something I'd never verbalized, but because I learned the game out of books initially, maybe this is why it was kind of in my soul to eventually put out a book, and eventually the opportunity presented itself with all this information I'd gotten because I felt like I was almost being selfish if I didn't write it, because unless someone goes and takes the time to listen to all these podcasts, they're not going to get it. So it's in like one stop, and you're getting 17 insights from people, 18 with me, and then hopefully there'll be another one that says more lessons from the best or lessons from the best too, because there's lots of good stuff in my show.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, Mark, in terms of, I guess, guidance and maybe advice for someone who's looking to get into the golf industry, and that might be playing, it might be coaching, it could eventually be broadcasting, what would your sort of 2 or 3 things for them to think about and look out for to help them on that journey? What would you be thinking?
I would say that you mustn't despise networking. I'm inherently a pretty shy, reserved person, and there's been many, yeah, strange, isn't it? Because I'm in broadcasting. Um, but there's been many situations where I would show up and there'd be someone that I should go and introduce myself to and talk to them because you can learn stuff from them that I didn't. And I've missed opportunities. Now if I see Tiger Woods in the corner of the room, old me would have just kind of stayed in the corner and not said something. But I want to say my first bit of advice to someone is like, if you want to get into the industry, if you want to play whatever it is, network. Don't be afraid of, sticking out your hand, greeting someone. And then the extension of that is to don't be afraid to ask. And then the extension of that is to just make sure you treat everybody well. And you treat people the same way you would treat Tiger Woods, or the same way you'd treat the Queen or the King. Don't respect titles, respect people. Because it's, in as much as what the golf industry seems big, it's really pretty small. And at the highest level, people are talking all the time. And the last thing you want to do is to paint yourself into a corner because you said something rough to somebody else. Because, misery loves company. So
That's so true.
So people talk a lot. So I would say don't despise the network. I'd say be brave and go and first off network, but greet people, ask questions, and then just treat people well. Whether they're the janitor or the king, you treat them the same way. And if you're fortunate, you'll kind of get to live a little bit of a life like me, because I'm not some special human being. I'm just blessed, and I got to meet some pretty cool people that opened some cool doors for me.
Yeah, and I think I heard you on a podcast saying that your dad reminded you that when you were a kid, you told him you wanted to be a teacher, and that was before the golf thing came around. And it's super interesting listening to you. I think you knew in your heart that was where you wanted to be eventually. It's awesome.
I'd love to have played on the PGA Tour for a while. I'd
Of
have a lot
course,
more.
I mean,
I'd have a lot more spending money. Yeah, yes, but I think in the end, a teacher was what was encoded inside of me. My kids say to me all the time, I've got 2 daughters, Isabel and Sophia, and sometimes they'll say to me, I'm getting thumbs up. They'll say to me, they're like, Dad, okay, this is not a teaching moment. With no lessons here, kind of thing. So maybe this is what I do, or maybe that's just years and years of experience. I've been teaching since '96. So yeah, I think it's sort of encoded, but it's a big responsibility being a coach. I will say this too: if there are any aspirant instructors within the sound of my voice, take your job seriously, because you are the shepherd to someone else's athletic ability, and you hold the keys. So don't be rash, don't be willy-nilly with information. Don't be, my dad always used to say to me, he goes, so you want to be a teacher? He goes, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. And it's hard to say, I don't know when someone's paying you. But if you're honest, if you're honest that way, you'll earn more respect, I think, than what you will if you fake some answer. And so I will say to teachers, I'm like, take your job seriously, because you are in charge of someone else. And if you really are truthful and you're honest about that, I believe you'll have anyone will have a lot of success.
Absolutely. So, Mark, thanks so much for your time. You've been incredibly generous coming on the show. In terms of people getting in contact through socials, and you're incredibly responsive. You even answered my message, which was really fantastic. Thanks so much. Where can people find you if they don't already know?
Yeah, sure. I answer when I can. I try to. I'm on Instagram and on X at Mark_Immelman. I have a website, markimmelman.com. There's a YouTube channel where you can watch all of the podcasts and get golf tips and stuff. That's just search and subscribe to Mark Immelman there. And the book you can get at back9press.com, or you can get it at Amazon. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. Type in Immelman, you're going to find one or two. You're going to find myself and my brother. I'm Mark, not Trevor.
Fantastic. I wonder how often you get to say the answer, I'm Mark and not Trevor.
Yeah, it's a personal joke. For the longest time in my career, I was Trevor's brother, but now I've made I've made a splash enough to sort of have my own identity. But we still joke. He's been called Mark and I've been called Trevor. And CBS, the one time at one tournament, we have golf carts you travel around in, and they put your names on the front of the cart. And oftentimes when I'm out on the course, I'd have people go, "Hey, Trevor, man, we love you." And my on-course spotter would be like, "That's Mark, for goodness sake." So the production manager put on the front of my cart, she put down there, "Not Trevor." And on the front of Trevor's cart, she put on the sticker that said, "Not Mark." So yeah, we get mixed up once or twice, but pretty much we've forged our own paths now.
Fantastic. Listen, thanks so much for coming on, Mark. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Keep up the good work.
Thanks. A huge thanks to Mark Immelman for taking us through his journey. I loved hearing about his incredible passion for sharing so much with everyone involved in the game through his podcast and his constant presence in social media. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share it with your friends, and please do leave a review. It really helps the show reach more listeners. I'd also like to thank our partners, Lomond Golf Tours, for their ongoing support. They're an incredible partner for anyone looking to book their dream golfing experience. And finally, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Linked by Golf. I'll have another episode out soon. Thanks so much.